Okay, to the Ship of Theseus specifically. Now, what I'll do here, I'm going to lay out academically what the Ship of Theseus looks like, all logic and nice and stuff. The Ship of Theseus puzzle that brings out the problem of material constitution. First, let's start with some definitions, and I'm going to have on the screens all this stuff written now so that you can see a little bit better. Number one, when we say T, we mean the time when we have the original ship. And T+1 is the time when we have the continuous ship and the reconstructed ship. Aggregate sub OS means the aggregate of planks that make up the original ship, right? Aggregate, we just mean like a collection. So the collection that makes up the original ship. Aggregate RS is the aggregate of planks that make up the reconstructed ship, right? The one where you took the original parts and you put them back together. Aggregate CS means the aggregate of planks that makes up the continuous ship. That's the one where you keep like replacing parts, whatever that continues through there, right? That collection of planks, that's what we mean by aggregate CS. Now, again, this is very academic, all right? The Philosurfer show is all about the interesting. This is more about like, let's get hard code, right? So yeah, buckle up. It's not necessarily, I mean, you know, not necessarily gonna be awful, but this is not easy. So the original ship at time T is numerically identical to aggregate OS, right? What does that mean? That means the original ship at the first moment, right, it is identical to the collection of planks, aggregate OS, right? And that is true by intuitions 3 and 5 and from the last video, right? We said compound material objects endure through time and change. Two material objects cannot exist in the same place at the same time, all right? Number 2, the aggregate OS, the aggregate of the original ship, is numerically identical to the aggregate RS, the aggregate of the reconstructed ship, right? That same collection that was there at the beginning is also there in the reconstructed ship, right? Why believe this? Aggregates X and Y are numerically identical if and only if X and Y have all and only the same parts. What does that mean? All right, let me explain. All right, two aggregates are numerically identical. They are the same exact thing. If and only if they have all the same parts and no extra parts, then that means they're the exact same collection, right? So this is set out very logically. The logic keys, right? The logic language is stifling at first, but it's important because we want to keep ourselves from confusion later on. The aggregate of the reconstructed ship, aggregate RS, is numerically identical to the reconstructed ship at T+1. All right? So in other words, at that later moment when we have the reconstructed ship and we have the continuous ship, right? The reconstructed ship is just identical to all the parts that make it up, the collection of parts. Again, 3 and 5 are the reasons why we would believe that. 3 being that there are that compound material objects endure through time and change, and 5 being that two material objects can't exist at the same place at the same time. In other words, the aggregate of the aggregate RS is not making up some new ship there, and reconstructed ship there is some second ship, right? They've got to be the same exact ship. All right, 4. The original ship at time T is numerically identical to the reconstructed ship at time T+1. That follows from the first 3 premises that we just laid out, plus intuition 6 that we had before, which is that identity is necessarily transitive, right? In other words, if one thing is identical to the second thing is identical to the third, the first thing is identical to the third, necessarily speaking. The original ship at time T is numerically identical to the continuous ship at time T+1 as well. Why believe that? Because intuition 2, remember, there are many kinds of material objects. 3, that those compound material objects can endure through time and change. And 4, some can even endure the losses and gains and replacements of parts. And it seems like the ship would be able to survive the loss of parts or the replacement of parts. And the original ship at T and the continuous ship at T+1 are spatially continuous, spatiotemporally continuous, right? Like you have this spatiotemporal, going from one to the next chain, right? A causal historical chain. So it seems like that the two of them would be numerically identical. So if that's the case, then the reconstructed ship at time t+1 is numerically identical to the continuous ship at time t+2, right? That follows from 4 and 5 there, and from 6, right? Which is that necessarily identity is transitive. But seems impossible. You have the exact same thing, right, at two different locations. And if that's the case, it seems like we have a contradiction here. That's the problem of material constitution. How is it the case that it seems like we have the same one ship in two different places at the same time? That can't be right. So seems like we have contradiction. And that's all the time we'll use on it for this week. This is complicated stuff. The next few times we'll look at different possible solutions, and hopefully that'll clarify a little bit more even what the problem is here. But that's all I got for today. Adios.